Tonight, we journey through over 1,000 years of history to an empire that bridged the ancient and medieval worlds. Close your eyes and let your mind drift as we explore the rise and fall of the Byzantine Empire, a civilization that preserved the flame of Rome long after the eternal city itself had faded into shadow. In the year 330 of the Common Era, as spring blossomed across the ancient world, Emperor Constantine the Great stood upon the hills overlooking the Bosphorus Strait. Before him lay the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, soon to be transformed into something magnificent. With deliberate ceremony, Constantine declared this place would become Nova Roma, New Rome, but history would remember it by another name, Constantinople, the city of Constantine, the Roman Empire, that vast colossus that had dominated the Mediterranean. World for centuries was changing. Constantine had already legalized Christianity with his Edict of Milan, fundamentally altering the spiritual landscape of the empire. Now he was creating a new capital, one that would serve as the eastern heart of Roman power. The location was perfect, almost divinely inspired. Constantinople sat at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, controlling the narrow passage between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Here, the wealth of the East would flow westward, and the armies of Rome could project power in all directions. The city's 7 hills echoed those of ancient Rome, but its harbors looked toward the future. As Constantine's architects and engineers worked tirelessly, something remarkable was taking shape. The new city would have its own senate, its own palaces, and its own character. While Rome remained the symbolic heart of the empire, Constantinople was becoming its beating pulse, drawing the lifeblood of commerce and culture from across the known world. When Constantine died in 337, he left behind more than just a city. He had planted the seeds of what would become one of history's longest-lasting empires. The division of the Roman Empire into western and eastern halves, which had begun as an administrative convenience, was slowly becoming permanent. The Western Empire, centered in Rome, would face the full fury of barbarian invasions, but the Eastern Empire, with its new capital gleaming beside the Bosphorus, would endure. The 4th century unfolded like a slow dream across the eastern Mediterranean. While barbarian tribes pressed against the Rhine and Danube frontiers in the west, the eastern provinces enjoyed relative stability. The emperors in Constantinople consolidated their power, built magnificent churches, and established institutions that would outlast the fall of Rome itself. Theodosius the Great, ruling from 379 to 395, made Christianity the official religion of the empire. In Constantinople's great forums and basilicas, the old gods were quietly forgotten as the cross became the symbol of imperial power. The Hagia Sophia, though not yet the magnificent structure we remember, already stood as a testament to the new faith that was reshaping the empire. When Theodosius died, his empire was divided between his 2 sons. Honorius received the west, Arcadius the east. This division, intended to be temporary, became the final separation of the Roman world. The Western Roman Empire, battered by Goths, Vandals, and Huns, grew weaker with each passing year. In 476, the last Western emperor was deposed by a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer. Rome had fallen, but in Constantinople, the purple still held its ancient majesty. The Eastern Roman Empire, what we now call the Byzantine Empire, considered itself the legitimate continuation of Rome. Its emperors still called themselves Roman emperors, its citizens still called themselves Romans, and its armies still fought under the eagles that had once conquered the world. The early Byzantine emperors faced their own challenges. The Huns under Attila demanded tribute. Persian armies threatened the eastern frontiers. Within the empire, theological disputes raged with the fury of political rebellions. The nature of Christ's divinity sparked riots in the streets of Constantinople as different factions of Christians fought over doctrinal subtleties that seemed to matter more than life itself. Yet somehow, the empire endured. Its administration was more efficient than Rome's had ever been. Greek, not Latin, was becoming the language of government and culture. The empire was transforming, adapting, evolving into something new, while never forgetting its Roman heritage. In 527, a man of humble origins ascended to the throne of Byzantium, who would forever change the course of history. Justinian I, born a peasant in what is now North Macedonia, harbored an impossible dream: to restore the Roman Empire to its ancient glory, to reconquer the lost provinces of the West, and to rule once again over a unified Mediterranean world. Justinian was aided in this grand ambition by his remarkable wife, Theodora. Once an actress and courtesan, she became one of the most powerful women in Byzantine history. Together, they transformed Constantinople into a city of unparalleled magnificence. The Hagia Sophia, that architectural marvel which still takes the breath away after 15 centuries, rose under their patronage. Its soaring dome seemed to float on light itself, an earthly echo of the heavenly realm. But Justinian's greatest achievement may have been the Corpus Juris Civilis, the codification of Roman law. Working with the brilliant jurist Tribonian, Justinian created a legal framework that would influence European law for over 1,000 years. Every principle of justice, every precedent, every statute was carefully examined, organized, and preserved. In a world where knowledge was fragile and easily lost, this was an act of breathtaking foresight. The emperor's military campaigns began with stunning success. His generals Belisarius and Narses proved themselves to be among history's greatest commanders. The Vandal kingdom in North Africa fell in a lightning campaign that lasted less than a year. Sicily was quickly occupied. Then came the great prize, Italy itself. The Gothic War dragged on for nearly 2 decades, from 535 to 554. Byzantine armies fought through the Italian peninsula, besieging cities, devastating the countryside, and slowly grinding down Gothic resistance. Rome itself changed hands multiple times. When victory finally came, it was Pyrrhic. Italy lay in ruins, its population decimated, its economy shattered. Meanwhile, plague struck the empire with unprecedented fury. The plague of Justinian, likely bubonic plague, killed perhaps 40% of Constantinople's population. Trade collapsed, tax revenues plummeted, and the empire's resources were stretched to the breaking point. Justinian himself fell ill, but recovered, earning him the nickname the Plague Bringer from his suffering subjects. The emperor's wars had overextended the empire. The reconquered territories in the west required constant defense, draining resources from the more vital eastern frontiers. When the Lombards invaded Italy in 568, just 3 years after Justinian's death, the empire lacked the strength to stop them. The dream of Roman restoration began to crumble almost as soon as it had been achieved. Yet Justinian's reign was not a failure. He had preserved and codified the legal heritage of Rome. He had built architectural marvels that still inspire awe. He had shown that the Byzantine Empire could still project power across vast distances. Most importantly, he had given his people a glimpse of their glorious past and a vision of what they might achieve again. As the 7th century dawned across the Byzantine Empire, the world seemed to be holding its breath. For over 3 centuries, Byzantium and Persia had fought an intermittent but devastating series of wars along their eastern frontier. These 2 great empires, representing Christianity and Zoroastrianism, civilization and ancient tradition, had exhausted themselves in their endless struggle for supremacy. The final Persian War began in 602 and raged for nearly 3 decades. The Persian king Khosrow II, driven by ambition and religious fervor, invaded Byzantine territory with unprecedented success. Persian armies swept through Syria and Palestine, capturing Antioch, Damascus, and most shocking of all, Jerusalem. The Holy Cross itself was carried away to Ctesiphon as a trophy of Persian victory. But the Byzantines had not forgotten the military genius that had once carried their eagles to the ends of the earth. Emperor Heraclius, ascending the throne in 610, proved to be one of history's great warrior emperors. After years of careful preparation, he launched a series of brilliant campaigns that took the war into the Persian heartland itself. At the Battle of Nineveh in 627, Byzantine forces shattered the Persian army and opened the road to Ctesiphon. Khosrow II was overthrown and murdered by his own nobles. The new Persian king sued for peace, returning all conquered territories and the Holy Cross to Byzantine control. Heraclius entered Jerusalem in triumph, personally restoring the sacred relic to its place. It seemed that the ancient struggle between East and West had finally ended in Byzantine victory. But even as Heraclius celebrated his triumph, a new force was stirring in the deserts of Arabia. The Prophet Muhammad had united the Arab tribes under the banner of Islam, and his followers were beginning to look beyond the peninsula toward the rich lands of the north. In 636, just 4 years after the Persian War had ended, a Byzantine army was annihilated by Arab forces at the Battle of Yarmouk. The conquest was swift and devastating. Syria fell first, then Palestine. Alexandria, that ancient center of learning and culture, surrendered after a brief siege. The Persian Empire, weakened by its long war with Byzantium, collapsed entirely. Within a century of Muhammad's death, Islamic armies had conquered territory stretching from Spain to India. The loss of Egypt was particularly catastrophic for Byzantium. For 1,000 years, Egyptian grain had fed Constantinople. Egyptian wealth had funded Byzantine armies. Now the empire's resources were cut in half almost overnight. The great cities of Antioch and Alexandria, once proud centers of Christian learning, fell under Islamic rule. The empire that had stretched across 3 continents was suddenly reduced to Anatolia, the Balkans, and a few scattered outposts. Yet Byzantium survived this catastrophic century. The empire's bureaucracy adapted to new realities. Its armies, though diminished, learned new tactics suitable for fighting mobile Arab raiders. Its people, though shaken, maintained their faith and their identity as Romans. The Islamic conquest had ended the dream of universal empire, but it had not destroyed the Byzantine state. In the year 726, Emperor Leo III issued a decree that would divide the Byzantine Empire for over a century. He ordered the destruction of religious icons throughout the empire, declaring that the veneration of images was tantamount to idolatry. Thus began the iconoclastic period, one of the most traumatic chapters in Byzantine history. The emperor's motives were complex. Islamic successes against Christian armies had led some to believe that God was punishing the empire for its idolatrous practices. The Old Testament prohibition against graven images seemed clear. Perhaps, Leo reasoned, the empire could regain divine favor by purifying its religious practices. But the imperial decree unleashed forces that the emperor had not anticipated. Throughout the empire, soldiers and officials began destroying centuries of artistic achievement. Magnificent mosaics were scraped from church walls. Ancient icons, some believed to have been painted by St. Luke himself, were burned in public squares. Monasteries, the guardians of much religious art, became centers of resistance. The Patriarch of Constantinople, Germanos, refused to support the emperor's policy and was forced to resign. Pope Gregory II in Rome condemned iconoclasm and excommunicated Leo III, further widening the growing rift between Eastern and Western Christianity. The empire's European territories, particularly in Italy and the Balkans, erupted in revolt. Religious art was not merely decoration in Byzantine society, it was theology made visible. Icons were believed to be windows into the divine realm, allowing the faithful to communicate directly with Christ, the Virgin Mary, and the saints. To destroy these images was to sever the connection between heaven and earth, to make religion cold and abstract rather than immediate and personal. The iconoclastic emperors, however, were not merely destructive. They channeled their religious fervor into military campaigns against the Arabs and Bulgars. Leo III's son, Constantine V, proved to be one of Byzantium's most successful military commanders. His victories against the Bulgarian Empire earned him the grudging respect of even his religious opponents, though they nicknamed him Kopronimos, dung-named, for his supposed desecration of a baptismal font. The controversy raged through several generations. Some emperors supported iconoclasm, others opposed it. The Second Council of Nicaea in 787, convened by Empress Irene, officially restored the veneration of icons, but the victory was temporary. Emperor Leo V renewed the policy of iconoclasm in 815, and the struggle continued for another generation. The final restoration of icons came in 843, during the regency of Empress Theodora. The ceremony of restoration was so significant that the Orthodox Church still celebrates it annually as the triumph of orthodoxy. The theological victory had broader implications. It affirmed the incarnational nature of Christianity, the belief that the divine could manifest itself in material form. The iconoclastic period left deep scars on Byzantine society. Countless works of art had been destroyed, never to be recovered. The relationship between church and state had been fundamentally altered. The papacy had been permanently alienated from Constantinople. Yet the empire had also demonstrated its remarkable ability to survive internal division and emerge with its essential character intact. In 867, a man of humble Armenian origin seized the Byzantine throne through murder and treachery. Basil I, known to history as the Macedonian, would found a dynasty that would rule for 2 centuries and preside over one of the most remarkable periods in Byzantine history. The Macedonian dynasty, despite its name, was not actually from Macedonia. The epithet came from the theme or military district where Basil first served, but the achievements of this dynasty would rival those of any royal house in European history. Under Macedonian rule, the Byzantine Empire experienced a renaissance in learning, art, military power, and territorial expansion that historians still marvel at today. Basil I himself was a complex figure, part peasant adventurer, part visionary statesman. He had risen to power by becoming the close companion and eventual murderer of Emperor Michael III. Yet once on the throne, he proved to be an effective ruler. He reformed the legal code, updated Justinian's ancient laws for a changed world, and began the military campaigns that would restore Byzantine power in the East. It was under Basil's successors, however, that the empire truly flourished. Leo VI the Wise was one of history's great lawgivers, producing the Basilica, a comprehensive legal code that would govern Byzantine society for centuries. His military handbook, the Tactica, became the standard text on warfare throughout medieval Europe. But the true hero of the Macedonian Renaissance was Basil II, known as the Bulgar Slayer. Ascending the throne as a child in 976, he would rule for half a century and expand the empire to its greatest extent since Justinian. His campaigns against the Bulgarian Empire were marked by legendary brutality. After the Battle of Kleidion in 1014, he allegedly blinded 15,000 Bulgarian prisoners, leaving one man in every 100 with a single eye to guide his comrades home. Yet Basil II was more than just a successful general. Under his rule, the empire's finances were restored, its administration reformed, and its territories expanded, not just in the Balkans, but in the east as well. The great Arab emirates of northern Syria were conquered. The empire's frontier was pushed deep into Mesopotamia. For the first time in centuries, Byzantine armies were again advancing rather than retreating. The cultural achievements of this period were equally impressive. The University of Constantinople was refounded, becoming a center of learning that attracted students from across Europe. Scholars like Photios the Great collected and preserved classical texts that might otherwise have been lost forever. The artistic Renaissance produced masterpieces like the mosaics in Hagia Sophia, where the Virgin Mary and Christ Pantocrator still gaze down with ethereal beauty. This was also the period when Byzantine missionaries carried Orthodox Christianity to the Slavic peoples. Saint Cyril and Methodius created the Cyrillic alphabet, allowing Slavic languages to be written for the first time. Their work among the Bulgars, Serbs, and Russians would have consequences far beyond the medieval period. It established the foundation for Russian Orthodox civilization that would eventually claim to be the Third Rome. The Macedonian period represented the last great flowering of Byzantine power and culture. The empire's enemies, Arabs to the east, Bulgars to the north, and increasingly Western European crusaders, learned to respect and fear Byzantine arms. The purple worn by the emperor in Constantinople was again recognized as the most prestigious crown in Christendom. Yet even at its zenith, cracks were beginning to appear in the empire's foundation. The great military families that had provided the Macedonian emperors, with their finest generals, were accumulating dangerous amounts of wealth and power. The theme system that had long provided the empire with citizen soldiers was breaking down as small farmers were forced off their land. Most ominously, a new people were migrating into Anatolia from the steppes of Central Asia, the Seljuk Turks. In the middle of the 11th century, as the Macedonian dynasty entered its final phase, a new threat emerged on the empire's eastern frontier. The Seljuk Turks, recent converts to Islam, had conquered much of the Middle East and were now turning their attention to the rich provinces of Byzantine Anatolia. The Turks were different from any enemy the empire had previously faced. Unlike the Arabs, who were primarily raiders seeking booty, the Turks came as permanent settlers. They brought with them not just armies, but entire populations, herders, farmers, artisans, and merchants. When they conquered a region, they transformed it completely, replacing Christian communities with Islamic ones, Greek language with Turkish, sedentary agriculture with nomadic pastoralism. The first serious Turkish raids began in the 1040s, probing Byzantine defenses and testing the resolve of local commanders. What they found encouraged them to return in greater numbers. The theme system, which had once provided the empire with a ready supply of soldier farmers, was in decline. Great landowners had absorbed small holdings, creating vast estates worked by dependent peasants. The empire's military was increasingly composed of foreign mercenaries rather than native troops. At the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, these weaknesses came together in a catastrophic defeat. Emperor Romanos IV of Diogenes, leading a large but poorly coordinated army, was outmaneuvered and captured by the Seljuk Sultan Alp Arslan. The defeat was not just military, but psychological. It shattered the empire's confidence and opened Anatolia to wholesale Turkish settlement. The aftermath of Manzikert was even more damaging than the battle itself. Civil wars erupted as rival claimants fought for the throne. Provincial commanders made private deals with Turkish raiders. The empire's administrative system, which had functioned effectively for centuries, began to collapse. Within a generation, the Turks had occupied most of Anatolia, the empire's heartland and primary source of manpower, the loss of Anatolia was catastrophic. For over 7 centuries, these lands had been the core of Byzantine strength. Here, the theme armies had been recruited, the empire's food produced, its taxes collected. The great cities of Caesarea, Trebizond, and Nicaea had been centers of Orthodox Christianity and Greek culture. Now they were becoming Turkish and Islamic. Yet the empire adapted as it had so many times before. The Komnenos dynasty, which came to power in 1081, proved remarkably resilient. Alexios I Komnenos was one of history's great diplomatists, playing the empire's enemies against each other while slowly rebuilding Byzantine strength. He recognized that the old ways were gone forever. The empire could no longer depend on citizen soldiers and native commanders. Instead, he recruited mercenaries from across Europe and beyond. Norman knights from southern Italy, Russian warriors from Kiev, Turkish horsemen who had fallen out with their own rulers. This new multinational army proved effective in limited campaigns. The Komnenoi gradually pushed back Turkish forces from some areas of western Anatolia. They established diplomatic relations with the Crusader states, using Western European enthusiasm for holy war to their own advantage. Most importantly, they created a new administrative system based on the great landed families rather than the old theme structure. But the Turkish conquest had fundamentally altered the balance of power in the eastern Mediterranean. The empire that had once controlled 3 continents was now reduced primarily to the area around Constantinople, parts of Anatolia, and scattered territories in the Balkans and southern Italy. The great age of Byzantine expansion was over. From now on, the empire would be fighting primarily for survival. In the year 1095, Emperor Alexios I Komnenos made a fateful decision that would have consequences far beyond anything he could have imagined. Desperate to recover the lost provinces of Anatolia from the Seljuk Turks, he sent ambassadors to Pope Urban II requesting military assistance from Western Europe. What he received was far more than he had bargained for. Urban II's response was the First Crusade, a massive military expedition that would fundamentally alter the relationship between Eastern and Western Christianity. The emperor had requested a few thousand professional soldiers to serve as mercenaries in his armies. Instead, tens of thousands of Western Europeans, from knights to peasants, began marching toward Constantinople with the declared intention of conquering Jerusalem. The Crusades represented both an opportunity and a threat for Byzantium. On one hand, the military pressure they applied to Islamic powers in Syria and Palestine reduced the threat to Byzantine territories. The Crusaders' conquest of Antioch and Jerusalem created buffer states between the empire and its enemies. On the other hand, the Crusaders were often as hostile to Orthodox Christianity as they were to Islam. Cultural and religious differences that had been simmering for centuries now came to the surface. Western Europeans viewed the Byzantines as effeminate, untrustworthy, and theologically suspect. The Byzantines saw the Crusaders as crude barbarians who understood neither diplomacy nor the complex realities of Eastern politics. When Emperor Alexios demanded that Crusader leaders swear oaths of allegiance before crossing into Asia, many complied only reluctantly. The relationship deteriorated further during subsequent crusades. The Second Crusade, 1147 to 1149, was marked by open hostility between Byzantine and Western forces. Emperor Manuel I Komnenos, trying to maintain diplomatic relations with the Islamic powers while supporting Christian military efforts, was accused by the Crusaders of treachery and secret alliances with their enemies. These tensions exploded during the Fourth Crusade, which began in 1202 with the noble intention of recapturing Jerusalem, but ended with one of the greatest betrayals in Christian history. The Crusaders, unable to pay the Venetians for transportation to the Holy Land, were persuaded to attack Zara, a Christian city on the Adriatic coast. From there, they were further persuaded to intervene in Byzantine politics. In 1204, the Crusaders stormed Constantinople itself. For 3 days, the greatest city in the Christian world was subjected to systematic pillage. Churches were looted, libraries burned, artworks destroyed or shipped west. The Hagia Sophia was stripped of its treasures, and horses were stabled in its nave. Thousands of precious manuscripts, the accumulated wisdom of a millennium, went up in smoke. The sack of Constantinople in 1204 was more than just military conquest, it was cultural catastrophe. The Latin Empire of Constantinople, established by the Crusaders, lasted only until 1261, but the damage was irreversible. The unity of the Christian world, already strained, was permanently shattered. The Orthodox and Catholic churches would never again be reconciled. Byzantine successor states survived in Nicaea, Trebizond, and Epirus. The Empire of Nicaea, under the capable leadership of the Lascaris family, gradually rebuilt Byzantine power while the Latin Empire grew weaker. In 1261, Emperor Michael VIII Palaiologos recaptured Constantinople with relatively little resistance, restoring the Byzantine Empire after nearly 60 years of exile. But the restored empire was a shadow of its former self. The Fourth Crusade had destroyed not just buildings and artworks, but the empire's commercial networks, administrative systems, and military organization. The Genoese and Venetians now dominated Eastern Mediterranean trade. The empire's European territories had been carved up among various Latin rulers. Most critically, the empire's financial resources were so depleted that it could no longer maintain effective military forces. The Fourth Crusade marked the beginning of the end for Byzantium. While the empire would survive for another 2.5 centuries, it would never again be a great power. The tragedy was that the Crusades, intended to strengthen Christianity against Islamic expansion, had instead fatally weakened the eastern bulwark of Christendom, just as new and more dangerous. Enemies were emerging. The restored Byzantine Empire of 1261 bore little resemblance to the great power that had once dominated the eastern Mediterranean. Michael VIII Palaiologos and his successors ruled over a collection of scattered territories, surrounded by hostile neighbors and dependent on foreign mercenaries for defense. Yet in these final centuries, the empire produced some of its most remarkable cultural achievements and demonstrated an almost superhuman ability to survive against impossible odds. The Palaiologos dynasty, which would rule until the empire's end, faced challenges that would have destroyed lesser states immediately. The empire was essentially bankrupt, its treasury empty, its army a shadow of its former self. Italian merchants controlled what remained of Byzantine commerce. The Bulgarians and Serbs were expanding into former Byzantine territories. Most ominously, the Ottoman Turks were beginning their expansion from their base in northwestern Anatolia. Yet under these desperate circumstances, the empire experienced what historians call the Palaiologos Renaissance. Unable to afford great military campaigns or vast building projects, the emperors and their nobility turned to scholarship, theology, and art. The mosaics and frescoes of this period, particularly those in the Chora Church in Constantinople, are among the finest achievements of medieval art. Scholars like Maximos Planudes and Demetrios Kydones translated Latin works into Greek and Greek works into Latin, facilitating intellectual exchange between East and West. The empire's survival strategy became increasingly sophisticated. Since they could not match their enemies' military strength, Byzantine diplomats became master manipulators of the balance of power. They played Genoese against Venetians, Bulgarians against Serbs, various Turkish emirates against each other. When the Ottoman threat became too great to handle alone, They even negotiated with the papacy about reuniting the Orthodox and Catholic churches in exchange for Western military aid. The attempted church union, proclaimed at the Council of Lyons in 1274 and again at the Council of Florence in 1439, was deeply unpopular with the Byzantine people. Orthodox clergy and lay people viewed it as betrayal of their ancestors' faith. The popular saying, "Better the Sultan's turban than the Pope's tiara," reflected the average Byzantine's preference for Islamic rule over Catholic domination. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Empire was growing stronger with each passing decade. Unlike previous Turkish states, the Ottomans created a sophisticated administrative system that could govern diverse populations effectively. Their military, built around the elite Janissary corps of slave soldiers, was among the world's most effective. Most importantly, they had learned to combine Turkish military prowess with Byzantine administrative techniques and Islamic law. The Ottomans' conquest of Byzantine territory was gradual but relentless. They first established a foothold in Europe at Gallipoli in 1354. The great fortress of Adrianople fell in 1361, becoming the new Ottoman capital of Edirne. By 1400, Constantinople was an island of Byzantine territory in an Ottoman sea, connected to the outside world only by sea. The siege of 1453 was almost anticlimactic. Sultan Mehmed II, later known as the Conqueror, had spent years preparing for the final assault. He had cast enormous cannons capable of breaching even Constantinople's legendary walls. He had assembled a fleet that could challenge Byzantine control of the Golden Horn. Most importantly, he had created a military machine that could sustain a long siege without internal dissension. Emperor Constantine the Paleologos, the last of the Byzantine emperors, faced the siege with remarkable courage. He refused offers of safe passage, choosing instead to die with his empire. On the morning of May 29, 1453, he donned his imperial regalia one final time and led a desperate charge against the Ottoman forces breaking through the walls. His body was never definitively identified among the dead. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves throughout Europe. For over 1,000 years, the city had stood as the eastern bastion of Christendom. Its conquest by Islamic forces was seen as a catastrophe of biblical proportions. Yet in many ways, the Byzantine Empire had been dying for centuries. What ended in 1453 was not a vibrant civilization, but the ghost of one, maintained by the determination of its people and the skill of its diplomats long after its military and economic foundations had crumbled. As the sun set on May 29th, 1453, and the double-headed eagle of Byzantium was lowered for the last time from the walls of Constantinople, an empire that had endured for over 1,000 years came to an end. Yet in many ways, the story of Byzantium was just beginning a new chapter, as its influence spread far beyond the borders it could no longer defend. The scholars and artists who fled the dying empire carried with them the accumulated wisdom of centuries. In Italy, Byzantine refugees contributed to the Renaissance, bringing with them Greek manuscripts that had been lost to Western Europe for generations. The works of Plato, preserved in Byzantine libraries, helped inspire the humanist movement that would reshape European thought. Orthodox Christianity, refined and defined by centuries of Byzantine theology, spread far beyond the empire's borders. The Russian Empire, which had married into the Paleologos family and adopted the double-headed eagle as its symbol, declared Moscow to be the Third Rome. For 4.5 centuries, until the Russian Revolution of 1917, the Tsars claimed to be the heirs of the Byzantine emperors. The legal heritage of Byzantium proved equally enduring. Justinian's law codes, refined by generations of Byzantine jurists, became the foundation for legal systems across Europe. The concept of Khazaropapism, The union of political and religious authority in a single person influenced the development of absolute monarchy. Even the Ottoman Empire, the empire's conqueror, adopted many Byzantine administrative practices and customs. Perhaps most importantly, Byzantium had preserved the classical heritage of Greece and Rome through the long centuries of the Dark Ages. While Western Europe struggled to maintain basic literacy, Byzantine scholars continued to study Aristotle and Homer, Euclid and Galen. The Renaissance was possible in large part because Byzantium had kept the ancient flame burning through. The medieval knight, the empire's military legacy, was equally significant. Byzantine innovations in fortification, siege warfare, and naval tactics influenced military development across the medieval world. The theme system provided a model for military organization that was copied from Bulgaria to the Holy Land. Even Byzantine diplomacy, with its emphasis on intelligence gathering, alliance building, and the careful manipulation of enemies, became a standard feature of European statecraft. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Byzantine history was the empire's extraordinary resilience. For over 11 centuries, through conquests and disasters, plagues and famines, civil wars and foreign invasions, the empire endured. It survived the fall of Rome, the rise of Islam, the Crusades, the Black Death, and countless other catastrophes that destroyed lesser states. This endurance was not merely military or political, but cultural and spiritual. The Byzantines never forgot who they were or what they represented. The empire's longevity offers lessons that extend far beyond medieval history. It demonstrates the importance of adaptability in the face of changing circumstances. The Byzantines repeatedly reinvented themselves, from Roman to Christian, from Latin to Greek, from Mediterranean to Anatolian power, while maintaining their essential identity. They showed that survival often depends not on strength alone, but on intelligence, flexibility, and the ability to learn from both enemies and allies. As we drift towards sleep, we might reflect on the remarkable story we have followed. From Constantine's vision of a new Rome to Constantine V's final charge, from the glories of Justinian to the cultural achievements of the Palaiologos dynasty, the Byzantine Empire represents one of history's most fascinating examples of human persistence in the face of overwhelming challenges. The purple that clothed the Byzantine emperors has long since faded, but the civilization they created continues to influence our world in countless ways. In the Orthodox churches of Eastern Europe, in the law codes of modern nations, in the art and literature of the Renaissance and beyond, the spirit of Byzantium lives on. Tonight, as you close your eyes and let sleep carry you away, remember the city beside the Bosphorus, where East met West, where classical learning met Christian faith, where the ancient world passed its treasures to the modern age. Remember the empire that called itself Roman to the very end, that preserved the flame of civilization through humanity's darkest hours, that showed the world what human determination and ingenuity could achieve. The Byzantine Empire is gone, but its story remains. A testament to the enduring power of human civilization, a reminder that even in the face of inevitable decline, beauty, wisdom, and dignity can flourish. Sleep well and dream of purple banners flying over the city of cities, where history itself was made and preserved for us all.